Hello and welcome to the Tai Chi Notebook podcast. My name is Graham Barlow. If you like animal movements in Chinese martial arts, then I think you'll like this episode. This is a chat between myself and Simon Thakur, who lives in Australia and does a system that he calls Ancestral Movement. It's quite fascinating. It's full of influence from Chinese martial arts, yoga, and other movement systems. So, without further ado, here he is. Simon, how are you?
Graham, I'm good, thank you. Very well.
It's nice to have you here. We've sort of known each other off and on for years and years, I think.
So long.
Yeah, ages. But it's nice to finally connect with you and have a chat.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.
So you do something that our listeners might not be familiar with, which is Ancestral Movement, which sounds great. Do you want to give me a quick overview of what that is and what you get up to?
A quick overview, hey? I dread the quick overview, honestly. Yeah, I'll see. I'll try not to get too detailed. It's sort of like it's almost like a perspective on training and body work and, mind body practice or whatever you might want to call it, that came out of me practicing many years within various traditions, mostly Asian traditions, but also like Capoeira Angola, like the old Afro-Brazilian thing. So practicing lots of meditation, practicing lots of movement systems and body work and stuff, but then also spending a lot of time out of the Aussie bush in the forest and things. So, climbing up, I was a bit more of a daredevil in my younger days. So climbing up cliff faces and, what have you, climbing around in trees, and we'd often go camping. And so cruising around in the forest at night when you can't really see and doing all this stuff. And just like always myself, even since I was a little kid, I've always had this sort of wondering about like ancient people and then more ancient people and then even more ancient people, and just going, where do we come from and what was it like living in the world before there were cities, before there were even villages, like pre sort of early proto-humans, and just like speculating and fantasizing about the incredible abilities these people and these sort of pre-human creature kind of people must have had. And then as a young person was, fascinated with yoga and meditation and, always like Lord of the Rings style, looking for portals to the fairy realm and what have you, but also like discovering stuff like that in the real world and going like, oh, what are these people doing? And like in the encyclopedia, like wasn't Britannica, I think it was the Oxford Encyclopedia that we had when I was a little kid. The pictures, if you looked up yoga, the pictures weren't of like beautiful Western women in leotards. The pictures were of like naked sadhus in the forest with ash smeared on their head and fires around it. As a little kid, I was just like, what the fuck are these guys doing? Like, and something about it was like, wow, this is awesome. Like, this is like, they're doing something different, and they're like in the forest and they're like, like essentially like some version of wizards or druids or whatever. But so anyway, in my own practice later on, it was like doing all these things, doing all these traditional practices, and then going out in the bush and like playing with them sort of started to give me all these ideas of like what a human body does in the forest and how that is like very different. It's like, so you can be doing your yoga practice and that's awesome and it makes you feel really good. But then when you're in the trees or whatever, like your body naturally moves differently. And I started to just have these, images. Obviously, I have an active imagination, these images of like these ancient humans who had all these like, like Avatar, like the creatures in the movie Avatar, running through the trees and leaping around and very cartoon sort of, I was struck by as a child, the mythic figure of Hanuman. My dad's Indian, and like Hanuman was always like, the monkey god is always like awesome, like all these cool skills. And like they were yogis, you know what I mean? Able to stay perfectly still, completely silent, like sensing nature all around them and like fully in their bodies, hairs standing on end at the slightest sense of threat in the environment, all these kinds of things. And so then later, and so I had all these ideas going around in my head for ages while I was studying, and I was studying Chinese internal martial arts and studying yoga and doing pranayama and a lot of Vipassana meditation, originally in the style of Esen Goenka. But all the physical practices I was doing, the capoeira I thought of as the antidote to the yoga and the internal martial arts, because the yoga and internal martial arts were always like upright posture, upright posture, upright posture. But then like I did judo as a kid and I did Japanese jiu-jitsu and capoeira. They were all tumbling and rolling all around. And so I called a lot of my own personal training in those early days, I called it monkey body training. So I was doing my internal arts, I was doing my yoga, but then I had my monkey body training, which allowed me to still be like, yeah, cool, I'm a monkey. It's like, it's fine. I don't have to be like rigidly, must have correct posture all the time. It's like, I'm a monkey. I'll do correct posture when I go to meditate. I'll do like different postures for different things. But the traditional practices from the yoga pranayama and the Chinese internal arts, like early on, I discovered the spinal wave, different variations of the spinal wave, and something about those just hit me really hard. Like they felt really good in my body. And I just felt compelled to just do lots and lots and lots of spinal waves. And I noticed very quickly that the more I did them, the better they felt. And I started to get like a picture of like, oh, how good this could feel. Imagine really developing this. Imagine how good that could feel to fully articulate the spine and to fully develop all of the musculature of the spine. So it's this muscular wave, and then a wave of breath rippling inside that muscular wave of the body and all the ribs moving, and then a wave of consciousness rising up the spine and stuff. And I was like, oh, this stuff is cool. Practiced it heaps. And then the spinal work started to just do something to my nerd brain and my evolutionary, because I was studying biology. I've got a academic background in biology and human biology and evolutionary biology. And it just started to activate something where I was like, oh shit, like some of these movements feel like a worm inside like a worm tube from my mouth to my anus that has that's conscious, but it's not this Simon consciousness. It's like wanting to eat and digest consciousness. And then in the spine, feeling like, oh shit, like part of me feels like a snake. And then at some point, maybe it was like 13, 14 years ago, something just clicked, because I've been doing crawling patterns and following a goanna around in the Aussie bush. We're lucky to have these awesome, beautiful monitor lizards. And following one of them around and mimicking the spinal wave of the monitor lizard as it walks, and realizing, oh, that's the same as the the swimming pattern of all these fish. And then going, oh shit, that's the same as my walking pattern in my body. And then looking at developmental movement in children and watching the baby crawl being exactly in the core of the body, the same as the way the goanna walks. And then cluing on to people like Krakovetsky with the spinal engine theory and these sorts of things, and just going, something clicked in, was like, oh, everything modern is layered on top of, there's nothing ever new. Nothing is ever new that replaces the old stuff. It's always just a modification of what came before. And therefore, all of my movement, all of my anatomy, I was studying Chinese medicine by this time, studying anatomy, and looking at anatomy, I was always just like, how can we be studying anatomy and biomechanics without the evolutionary context? Like, we're looking at shoulders, like what have shoulders evolved to do? Like what they do now is one thing for a modern human, but it's like, what have they evolved to do? What have legs evolved to do? Why have feet evolved to have, all these things? And people are talking about spinal stability and whatever. It's like, yeah, but like, have you guys ever tried running on slippery rocks on a riverbed at night when you can't see very well? Because a lot of the things you're talking about, gait and running, is like they go completely out the window when you're in an environment like that. All these sorts of things. And I was like, oh, okay, ancestry. This gradual clicking together of like, oh, there's layers of ancestry in the anatomy. There's layers of ancestry, like, the spine at the core. And then there's layers of ancestry in all of the ways we move. So it's like there's this human bit, but then the human bit is layered on top of a basic primate behavioral repertoire, which is layered on top of a slightly more basic sort of mammalian repertoire, on top of a basic reptile repertoire. We still have it. That was the realization for me, was like, oh, parts of my consciousness, just like parts of my anatomy. And I'm not talking that basic reptile brain, old school sort of theory, but that parts of my consciousness, parts of my nervous system, parts of the way my senses engage with the world, as well as like the basic pattern of four limbs and a tail and a head, and 5 fingers and toes and claws and stuff, that they are still running the basic patterns of a lizard with extra modifications on top. You know what I mean? And it's like, oh, okay, ancestral movement. And so that's when I started, I was teaching yoga, I was doing body work, I was doing exercise rehab, I was doing all these things. And then I was like, I kind of came out of the closet. I was like, hey, everyone, what about this? This is kind of what I'm really into, because it's like, okay, it's like we can use it for rehab, because it's like, look at the evolutionary sort of expectations of all the different joints of the body and how that works. So you can, as a rehab practitioner, I was an exercise rehab practitioner and body worker by this stage. They're really applicable to rehabilitation. They're really applicable to movement training, but also they can help us feel differently what it is to be a human being. Like we can feel ourselves less as this separate, freakish, weird, house living, computer using, completely different from the rest of the living world creature. And we can start to feel ourselves, like feel in our bodies, not intellectually, but feel through the exploration of our anatomy. We can feel, oh, okay, of course, the primate, the reptile, the fish, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of it. We have certain training methods that I use, but it's a perspective on, where these things come from, like different, like it shows up in Chinese things with the animal body. It shows up in African dance with animal body. It shows up in Indigenous Australian culture with all of these animal body practices, among many other things. Yeah. There you go.
Yeah. I mean, so many questions to ask about that. I mean, yeah, there's a YouTube documentary by a guy called Neil Shubin. I'm sure you've heard of, and he's the Your Inner Fish guy, his Inner Fish book. But he definitely had that idea that all animals kind of are related into one family, and we all go back to, essentially we start as fish, which is like a head and a spine, and then the next one is reptiles, and then the next one is primates and monkeys, and then you get humans. So were people discovering this idea separately? Like, did you discover this? It sounds like you sort of went on your own little journey and discovered this yourself.
Yeah.
At the same time as these other sort of evolutionary biologists are they all simultaneously discovering the same thing?
Well, I found that really cool, honestly, because it was probably about 14 years ago when all the chunks like just suddenly went, oh, ancestry. Oh, it's all ancestry. Oh, it's all the layers. It's all the layers back to the fucking colonies of single cell bacteria floating in the ocean. You know what I mean? It's all the layers are there, where that all like just really landed for me about 14 years ago. And then I, at some point after a few weeks of like just walking around, like nodding, going like, like that. Because, I've got like a solid like 10, 15 years of my own practice up to this point, and lots and lots and lots of speculating and wondering and curiosity. And then it's like, heaps of stuff getting like this new context coming into it. And so then I wrote something down, like blurted something. It was probably my first, like outside of the martial arts forums where I was blurting regularly, but this was like a different blurting on this other whole topic, which I'd kind of kept to myself up till this point. And I blurted it out onto Facebook, and was just like, am I mad? Like, does this make sense to anyone? A few people replied, and one of them was Scott Park Phillips. I'd encountered it somewhere, yeah. And because he has this background in the anthropology of dance. And he was just like, oh yeah, man, like you should check out Emily Conrad, Continuum Movement, Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen's Body Mind Centering, and a few other things. I checked them out, and it was like people who were coming from completely different places, having exactly the same, from the way they described it, like literally identical body experiences, and using different words, but coming up with, as far as I could tell, almost identical understandings of what they were experiencing. And then, like, this was also the time when Craig Mallett and I were teaching our natural movement classes in Canberra together. And then MoveNat was popping up. We encountered Rafe Kelly. I saw Rafe Kelly's early tree runner videos and straight away was just like, oh, I love this guy. And we instantly like connected. And then I found Your Inner Fish. I heard about Your Inner Fish when I went to a intensive sort of training with Tom Myers, anatomy trains.
Oh yeah, I know him. Yeah.
Yeah, I was a big fan of the anatomy trains when it came out and Tom Myers came to Australia. So I went and did a few intensives with him. And he was saying he was just reading this book called Your Inner Fish. And I was like, oh, that's my jam. I got to check it out. And it was like exactly like you say. It was like, yes, exactly what I'm talking about from an evolutionary biologist. And he's talking about it on a genetic level, on a molecular level, on the embryology of the thing. And it just gave me so much more stuff to research in my own time. Because, again, like I went and got a medical science degree and I've been studying all these different things and studying the neuroscience. And a lot of it has been studied to try and understand the practice and the experiences of what I've been doing. And it's like super fascinating. But it does seem like a lot of us, all as a product of our society, Darwin's theory's only been around for 150 years. It's still new. It's still very new. And we really haven't come to terms with it as a culture. You know what I mean? We're going through it now. And so in this period now ancestry's become a buzzword. Everyone's doing ancestral healing, ancestry this, ancestry that. But back when I said ancestral movement, I was thinking, shall I call it evolutionary movement? Shall I call it, what shall I call it? I was like, ancestral movement. And no one knew what I meant. But in the fitness world, in the neuroscience world, evolutionary psychology. And so I feel like it's like, it happened to me, but it's like a lot of us, we just society percolating with these ideas. And it just was like, come on, guys, think about where we come from, apply it to your movement practice, apply it to your psychology, apply it to your whatever. Yeah. So, but I invented, and yes.
I think, it's all clear that you invented it. It's fine.
Yeah, invented evolution. Yeah.
Yeah. Although you could make the argument that you rediscovered it because human beings have known this for a long time. Like,
absolutely.
You look at animals, like you say, you look at animals popping up in dance, look at them popping up in martial arts. I mean, all those shamans around the world that have been going for thousands of years.
Absolutely.
The animal movements, like they're connecting into the fact that we are all one connected family of life, aren't we? Getting down to like brass tacks, do you have like particular movements that you start people off with to sort of connect with their inner fish or inner reptile?
Yeah, so I kind of I teach in different forms. So we run for the last 12 years or so, we've been running these camps several times a year down on the far south coast of New South Wales here in Australia, which it started off just as our little camper practice group and a few people in a couple of days. And now it's we get people from around Australia and usually one or two internationals each time. I only announce them 6 months in advance at best. So, whatever. We camp in the bush for a week and we do a whole bunch of stuff. And in that context, we can really work through a lot of the deeper practices and also a lot of the deeper principles of practice. But I also teach 1-day workshops and 2-day workshops. And then I also teach regular classes throughout the week in which there's next to no talking and we just train. You know what I mean? So it's including wrestling classes, including some Chinese internal practice and so on. I use the Hunyuan Qigong I originally learned from Feng Zhichang's Hunyuan system. I use that as the sort of scaffolding to layer in a lot of these things in pretty much all of them, except for the wrestling. But even in the wrestling, actually, I still give a really strong priority to head movement and head position, and head movement and stance and spinal position, which is very much fundamental animal body practice. But so in all of the classes, yes, we start with some sort of spinal work. So we might work, say, 5 or 6 points along the spine, like the base of the skull, the center of the neck, the center of the chest, the sort of solar plexus, upper abdomen, a point below the belly button, and then the tailbone.
These are all chakra points, right?
Oh, of course, they're chakra points. Yeah. No, but we might work a few arbitrary points along the center line and practice moving them back and forth, moving them left and right, moving them in circles this way, circles that way, different forwards, backwards, side to side, up and down, and circles of, say, 5 or 6 points along the spine. And then some free movement, for example, a game that we practice a lot, which I sometimes call the swimming dragon, is where you might have a tennis ball and the other person has to follow the tennis ball, keep their nose a set distance from that tennis ball, and the other person like moves it around, and the first person just has to let their body move through space and be like soft enough and strong enough. It's really, really demanding leg training. Yeah, flat enough and strong enough to like move fully in all directions, following the ball and stuff. And so we might start with 5 or 6 points, but then the next week we might do 5 or 6 different points, you know, or then in a workshop, we might do 12 points. Or if we're on a retreat for a week, then we'd start off doing 5 or 6 points on the first day. We might do 12 points on the second day. And by the time we get to the 5th or 6th day, we're tapping on each other's spines, doing it one vertebrae at a time, all the way down the spine. And people are learning to actually get distinct awareness and find for themselves, every person has 1 or 2 chunks of their spine which are locked up, don't like to move, and they can't even feel it. And so you get that, wow, I couldn't even feel that bit. And then, that bit is connected to these ribs, which really inhibits my range of possible breathing patterns. Or, that one is connected to my lower back, and it is associated with the fact that the walls of my abdomen are always completely floppy and switched off, or my like lower abdomen is always held too tight and I'm never, ever, ever letting it relax. And, so we work with the spine. Through working with the spine, we unlock the breathing gradually. We've got all sorts of breathing practices that we do, learning to breathe into the front, along the chest, learning to breathe into the back to get the back ribs and the vertebrae moving with the breath through the back. With hands on each other's body, learning to breathe into the center so the front and back expand symmetrically, simultaneously, and so on. So yeah, we start with the spine, with movement. Gradually, we introduce the different, like how the spine influences breathing. And then once the spine's moving, then we start adding like crawling patterns and things like that. And, pushing and pulling on each other's bodies. And then it starts to get free.
It's almost like an evolutionary journey, isn't it? You start with the spine and then you're moving into, like using your limbs, I guess, later on.
Totally. So sometimes we actually do it specifically as an evolutionary journey, including the just feeling the breathing body and recognizing that at this base level, we're a breathing, pulsing bag of liquid, and then you've got your digestive tube, and then you've got your spine, and then you've got like the crawling patterns, and then you've got jumping and galloping patterns, and then you've got rolling and so on. And then obviously on the retreats, we've got a big jungle gym set up. So we're doing swinging and balancing and so on, and, throwing tennis balls and wrestling and what have you. Yeah, all this sort of stuff. One of the things I love is like when it gets to the human level is having people so we've explored not just the movements that are ancestral, as in like certain crawling patterns and certain jumping patterns and whatever, but then we start to like tune into this fact that we humans have this remarkable ability to copy the shapes and movements of any other creature, to copy the shapes and movements of trees and plants and hills and rocks and things created in our imagination, and just like hone in on this thing and go like, no other creature does this. The art of physical storytelling with our bodies through mimicking the shapes and movements and sounds of everything in the world. This is uniquely human. And I really advocate this idea that the physical storytelling with our bodies is much older than verbal language. And it's at the roots of our consciousness. It's the main way we transmit information. And that it's also the main way we learn about the world and connect to the world is through mimicking the world with our bodies. And there's this whole neuroscience that can be associated with it, of like that the more familiar you are with the movements of any movements you've done with your own body, your nervous system responds more strongly to those movements whenever you observe them happening in the world around you. So if you've practiced the movements of a chicken, then when you see a chicken running around, your nervous system will give you a little bit more of a sense in your body of what it might feel like to be that chicken. Literally, if you've done years of a particular Tai Chi form that's different to other Tai Chi forms, and then you watch that particular Tai Chi form that you've practiced lots of in your body, then when you're just watching it, just sitting in your chair, your nervous system will give you feelings in your body of like exactly, And you don't just know, you feel in the moment what it's like to be doing that. And so then we have this thing of like, oh, but if humans have been mimicking not just each other and not just the local animals, humans have been mimicking all of the animals and all of the plants and all of the weather patterns and landscape features of their environments since before we could speak. You think of pre-verbal humans trying to tell each other about their hunting trip, what they went, what they did, what happened. And they're doing it without words. They're doing it through physical theater. And you go, well, if you get better at that, then it will help you feel your living environment differently. And so going like, this is also ancestral. This is where we come from. And it's like, I talk about this as being like the storyteller's body and going like, we're physical storytellers. And in the modern world, all of this stuff has been suppressed. Part of it's just been atrophied through not needing it so much, but a lot of it has been actively suppressed. Like, don't do animal movements. Do not undulate your spine under any circumstances in public. You know what I mean? Like, it's thought of as like sexy or sensual or whatever. And so it's like, yeah. So there you go.
I had a lot of thoughts about that.
Yeah. You're into the shamanism stuff as well, right?
Yes, I'm very into the shamanism stuff. Only particularly following one guy, which is my teacher. I have done woeful amount of research around the subject. So I know very little about other styles of whatever it is.
Who's your teacher?
A chap called Damon Smith. He's in Cornwall in the UK.
I heard him on one or two of the podcasts. I can't remember if it was yours or not, but
what you're talking about, this going into your body and connecting with it, is what he would call level 2 of shamanism, which is amska, which is the Mongolian word for it, which translates as breath, but it doesn't mean like just breath, that limited word.
Yeah, totally.
The quickest way to connect with your inside body is to follow the breath in, because it literally comes from outside to in. So that's kind of what it means. But it really just means like feel and connecting to nature through sensory things, I guess. So basically everything you're talking about, you could call all of this amska. And when you get into physical movements, that's level 3, which is taking the amska feel and it coming out into a movement, right? So the idea the energy comes out into a movement,
right?
So that's like level 3, and then shamanism goes up to 7. Once it gets into level 4, I lose it a little bit, I've got to be honest, because it gets very, very subtle. So 3 is about making this energy appear into the physical world, and then level 4 is about threading it together, like finding the connecting thread that goes through that weave, that pattern you've made. And then once you've made that thread, you can sort of build something with it, and that's level 5, and that's the thing you get onto for the spirit journey. But beyond that, I haven't got a clue. That's 6 or 7. Like, I can't even talk about. I have no idea what he's talking about when he gets 6 or 7.
And is this all mostly coming from a Mongolian lineage?
He's got several lineages in it. So he's got a Japanese one, which is quite influential on it.
Right.
There's the shamaness called Miki, who had a lot of followers in Japan around the time the new religions popped up. Because he always says these people just naturally appear in times of crisis. Like Japan was going through a lot of crisis, and people who can connect to this stuff. There's some people who are just naturally gifted and just get it all. Like, I mean, you feel a little bit that way yourself, for the way you're connecting and realizing things. You're like you're discovering things and going, well, it's obvious, isn't it? It's like, to them, it's all just obvious. It's not difficult at all for us mere mortals. But so there's the Japanese lineage, and then there's the Mongolian. He had a Mongolian teacher as well, who was teaching him Mongolian, and he found out that he was actually quite adept at shamanic methods too. So he taught him that as well, and Mongolian wrestling as well, which is kind of handy. Yeah. So it was like rooted in a physical practice as well.
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah.
And obviously he's read a lot of the stuff by Terence McKenna, who was one of the early people trying to revive this stuff.
Yeah.
But he did it through mainly drugs, is what I think. But my teacher is like, he's like, that's cheating.
Right.
You just do it. You're meant to do it the hard way. You're not meant to take these sort of shortcuts to jump to level 4. Like, it's just not, it will work, but it's not the way, because you'll never be able to do it on your own.
Right. Yeah. I don't think it's cheating personally, but certainly for me it was like, because I loved like the magic mushrooms and stuff when I was younger and had like, but I was always a practitioner of traditions as well. And so without that, like many of my friends who were also into the magic mushrooms as young people and stuff, is like they had incredible revelations, but perhaps didn't quite anchor them and stabilize them and, you know what I mean, ground them and develop them into all sorts of things. Whereas for me, it was like I was doing my traditional practices and then they were being informed by this blasting open and this really powerful deculturing that happens under the influence of the mushrooms, for example, where it's like your cultural self just doesn't function and it's just you and nature and all of this other stuff, which is buried underneath, just emerges because a lot of it is automatic, a lot of it is instinctual, and the cultural self's just going like, I have no idea what's going on, no idea at all what's going on. But then all of this deeper, older stuff comes online because it's not being suppressed anymore. And so then, and I very strongly believe that like a lot of these practices and these traditions, maybe they came under the influence of natural drugs, but they all came through people in deep nature having altered states, right?
Yeah, Damon's argument is that if you can spend enough time in nature, you can feel all these things anyway.
Absolutely. Yeah. So especially if you're by yourself, because that's another thing in the ancestral movement work is that I still do, like, I've got a really long background in like early Buddhism, early Buddhist practice and yoga practice based on like Patanjali and some tantric stuff, but then also Chinese stuff and just like researching Taoism deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper over so long and just discovering like all this stuff is so massively there in the Chinese tradition. And it seems like it was happening 2,000-3,000 years ago when people first started writing stuff down in China, was that people were creating a world in which all of our interactions are with other humans or with other things to do with humans, like bookshelves and books and walls, and everything is human. And this Simon character that in this personality that each of us have, its function is to interact with other humans. If you're in nature, if you're in deep nature, there's no need for Graham. You know what I mean? Graham is bullshit suit act that is put on to interact with other human beings. But then we, through modern culture, have been so trapped in these personalities that we go out into nature and start still being like Simon, still trapped in Simon, trying to interact with the like awesome, like all living, all roaring natural world. And it's like, it doesn't work. And so but then beneath that, if you can learn to do through practice, and it's like, okay, maybe we're stupid enough that we need systematic practice in the modern world to release some of that physical tension, which is holding this Simon character in place, and let it go, and then go, oh, there's this whole other aspect of myself, all of these senses, all reaching out into the world, every little fiber of the body, listening and sensing to the world. And it's like, and it's got nothing to do with Simon, and it's always there. This is in Taoism, this is in Buddhism, this is in all of these traditions. And so much of it is just like, learn to relax your physical body. Learn to relax your physical body and then get deeper. Learn to relax the small spaces in your throat, the small spaces inside the skull where your habitual facial expressions are locked, the spaces between the ribs, in the belly, the deep central axis of the body. Learn to relax deeply the subtle tension in those parts, and you learn to release the personality, and you discover the body interacting in real time with the rest of the world. And this is the ancestral baseline. This is the ancestral baseline of interacting with the world. And after that, ideally, my vision is Simon emerges and says, hello, Graham, nice morning, isn't it? You say, yep, good day. And then subsides and back into that,
Yeah. The word that Damon has come up with for this artificial creation that we have to have to interact with other humans is the miasma. He's repurposed that word. It means sort of fog in Victorian times.
Right. Yeah.
That they thought was transmitting disease, but like a fog, it's always on us. Like, and he said his thing is that to exist in civilization, we have to have a miasma.
Absolutely.
Because otherwise it wouldn't work. So, but when you're on your own in nature, you can actually just let the miasma go and you can just be you, which is fantastic. I mean, all these great works of the esotericists over time, like the Rosicrucians and stuff. I don't know if you've ever read The Chemical Wedding of Christian Music.
Yeah.
It's split into days. The 7 days,
right.
The 7 stages of shamanism. The first day is getting rid of your miasma. So if you want to read it with that in mind, it's fantastic because he goes through all the pitfalls you have when you try to release this miasma. Like, other people will try and pull you back. And there's one bit in it where he's climbing up a wall trying to get away from these people and they're pulling him back down. And it's like other people don't want you to get rid of your miasma because then they think you're weird. So they will like, you know, and he said he had to in the end he has to kind of swing on a rope to escape the wall and stuff.
Right.
If you look at it all as an allegory, it actually is pretty well done.
Yeah.
Anyway, the points I was going to make, where I want to know where you stand, as a joke, on this idea of the spine being straight and upright versus looping all over the place. Like, because I mean, obviously we both do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. We know that in that your spine is constantly moving everywhere, every which way. And then we both do Chinese martial arts, and quite often you're told to just upright, like you would in a meditation pose.
Yeah.
So what's your take on that whole subject?
So one of the things that I work with, like with the example I told you about taking the different parts on the spine and moving them left and right and forwards and backwards and moving them in circles. And then we do that with all the joints and we learn to move them all in circles and so on. And so it's very much a misalignment practice. Like if you're practicing, like you put your feet under your shoulders and then you squat down halfway or 3/4 of the way down. And then you move your pelvis in a big horizontal circle, or you move your head in big horizontal circles or big circles. And you find yourself going into all of these ranges and alignments, which are well outside the normal habitual range. And they're all suboptimal. You would never deadlift, a large weight in those alignments. But by practicing all of those misalignments sensitively, you're training your proprioceptive system to feel more and more clearly where your joints are in space, where you're comfortable, where you feel strong. Yeah. So same with the spine. So if we watch animal wrestling videos, which everyone should do, especially
bears.
Bears are fantastic, but all the animals, I went through a phase where I was like, because I was watching animals wrestle, I saw goannas wrestling and they were wrestling for head position. And then I saw koalas wrestling and I was like, oh, they're wrestling for head position, because my wrestling coach had recently introduced me to the concept of head position. And I was just like, oh, wow. And I was like, oh, the Minotaur from Greek myth was a wrestler. And I thought of like the bull neck and the horns and the head position. And I was like, oh, awesome. And I started watching, I was like, okay, well, primates do it, mammals do it. And then I was looking at all these different animals and the way they all wrestle. And it's not fighting to the death. When they're fighting to hurt each other, they do completely different things. When primates like chimps and monkeys and stuff wrestle, it looks like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or freestyle wrestling. When they're fighting to hurt each other, they're leaping, doing overhand strikes and biting, and it's completely different, a completely different range of physical movements that they're doing, which is very interesting for those of us who do grappling arts. And it's like, is this real world self-defense or is this like play, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, but I found that all of them wrestle for dominant head position. And dominant head position for all the other animals means I can bite you because I'm up in here under your neck, but you can't bite me because your head is being pushed off and turned away from me. Yeah.
Right.
But when they're doing that, their spines are incredibly fluid, moving all around. But then when they achieve dominant head position, all of their limbs and their spine are perfectly lined up behind their head, driving forwards. So it's a balance of both. It's like everything's fluid enough to be able to move freely in 3 dimensions, but when they get the opportunity to use that straight spine and everything driving through with that optimal body posture, hell yeah, they use it. You get what I mean?
I mean, animals don't tend to carry things, but humans do a lot.
Mm.
So, except when we put stuff on a horse or something, you know, that's not their choice. They wouldn't normally do that. But when you're carrying loads of things or weight, you need the alignment. And I guess it's a bit like what you're saying. When you've got the killing attack motion, you're driving forward as if you're carrying weight, aren't you?
Mm. So also though, because you know, like these days, like I've got some young kids, and I don't have like all the energy to do like I do enough exuberant training, and then in my own practice at the moment, I'm practicing incredibly controversial. I know, absolute waste of time. I'm practicing a lot of like Wu Ji, Jandrop, just standing and releasing an emptiness. And you know what?
Yeah,
like,
yeah. Me too as well. Don't tell anyone.
No.
I mean, there's not a kettlebell in sight. It's pointless. However, I really enjoy it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it feels great. Like, so in that practice, it's like there's this whole ongoing process of discovery that like gently pressing the crown of the head towards like the top of the sky and then releasing everything in the body gradually brings about this alignment in which the whole spine, the back of the spine gets lengthened, the breath starts to sink into the back and down low in the body, but miraculously, the body doesn't fall over. And getting to that point of going like, oh, I'm not falling over. Oh, I can actually relax. Oh, I can actually completely and utterly let go. And the body and the posture gets better and the body doesn't fall over. And then you start to trust and go, oh, this is so relieving, let go. And you stay standing. And so in human beings, that perfectly upright spine is not a tense, you know, I used to think it had to be held and whatever. And it's like, no, it's strong. It's active. It's not like there's muscular activation, but it's super, super relaxed. And then in grappling, there's this other whole thing. It's like, if you want to play, then you need to give up top position at times. You know, you need to take turns and you move all around, and it's a bit more like capoeira. So I have a capoeira background and I approached Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu from the start and wrestling like capoeira, which meant that in a lot of cases I got messed up because I'd give top position to someone just for fun and they'd smash me. And it's like, oh, okay, that's not how animals play, but okay. And, you know, you got to learn to live with that. But the fun games are when you're flowing and you're allowing each other to take top position and not order. But if you really want to grapple, then you can have a lot of success not worrying about much except just be like, I'm just going to keep my posture. I'm just going to have good posture, agile footwork so you can't break my posture. Keep my arms close so you can't break my structure. And, you know, I'm a real Rob Bianchi fan, and it's like base posture structure. Don't give up your base. Don't let them break your posture. Don't let them break your structure. And just don't let them take you out of your good position. And instantly, a lot of jiu-jitsu just doesn't work. Like a couple of American wrestling coaches that I was watching a lot of recently, they were like, wrestling is the game of me trying to be in my good wrestling stance, and I'm going to take you further and further out of your stance. And that's all it is. You know, like Chris Payne says it's just a grit fight. These guys are saying it's just a stance fight. You just keep your stance, stay real relaxed, because your stance allows you to be relaxed. That's the point. It's not that it's tense. Your good stance, if it's really good, allows you to be more relaxed than the other guy. You know what I mean? So it's like, I feel like there's a lot in that of like, yes, upright, straight spine, good posture is awesome. But then what are you going to do when your posture gets broken? And that's where the internal arts are often failing utterly because they don't practice it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. You mentioned Chris Payne's then, like his teacher guru guy, Preet Mikkelsen.
Right. Yeah, he was just in Australia, finally. I went to a seminar. I went to a seminar and I nearly missed the birth of my baby because my commander's waters broke just as the seminar was finishing. It was awesome. I love Preet. Preet's amazing. Absolutely amazing.
Yeah. I love because his take on posture is a bit different to Rob Bianchi's. I guess it's one of those things where it's different, but maybe you could say it's the same. I don't know.
Mm.
Like when he does the hawking thing, which is like,
Right.
it's a sort of a crunched on one side of the body, other side of the
Yeah.
body extended. So it's like
Yeah.
it's like
Yeah.
that.
I love it. Love it.
Yeah. I do this all the time. And what I really like is flowing through the position. So I don't tend to try and stay in anything too long, but just never taking my elbows away from my ribs, but just keep moving through the different postures so they can never really get hold of you. So you're never really in danger, but you're also just frustrated them because every time they try and get you, you just move to another one, and then you move to another
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
But his idea of posture is not to have this amazingly straight spine, which I find really interesting. I don't know what you think about that.
Well, I feel like straight spine it lacks nuance of what we mean by a straight spine, because because the animal spine, which we all have, it can be straight in that it's got axial extension, meaning it's lengthened. It can be straight, but be curving from the tail to the head, curving with a little bit of flexion and a little bit of extension and a little bit of lateral flexion and a little bit of rotation, but it's still axially extended. And so those positions, like what Preet does, he's not collapsed. The spine's lengthened. One side is closed, the other side's open, and there's this curve in the spine. Can you visualize what I'm talking about here? It's like...
Yeah, I think so. If you think about it, when Preet's doing a hawking movement, which is
Yeah.
one side in, other side extend, if you just kept doing it side to side, you get the fish movement again, don't
Yeah,
you? The
totally. And
reptile
the baby bridge is another classic example. It's the same thing in extension, where it's like you see when a baby, like, again, I've got a 6-week-old, so she's doing it constantly at the moment. When they do that baby bridge, they're lengthening as much as they can. They're reaching their head away from their tail, and then their tailbone drives into the ground and they start doing bridges. And so their spine is straight. From what I'm talking about, it's a kind of straight in that it's axially extended and it's very beautifully aligned, and the limbs are lined up behind it, and all of the force in the body is organized and driving along this axis in both directions. Yeah. And it just happens to have a twist and a rotation in it. So that's what I mean by straight.
Yeah. I never thought about thinking about Preet's postures as part of the whole animal movements category. I don't know why I'd never connected those two things together in my brain before, but
I
it
never
makes
had
big sense when you... Yeah, I could just happened then because we're talking about, and we just introduced him, and it's like, well, of course that's what he's doing. He's just doing animal movements, but he's just stopping in one of them and talking about it for a bit.
I've just recently, because I picked up this rope flow thing a few months ago because a guy I follow on Instagram.
The guy who scoots the rope around, yes.
It's coming from David Weck.
Yeah, he was the original guy, right?
Yeah, but so there's all these guys, and it was this dude called Edward Troyce, who I was following on Instagram, who was just doing these fantastic movements and really beastly strong. And he's like, 5 years ago, I was a skinny vegan yoga guy with a messed up shoulder, and I took up the rope flow, and the rope flow is what sorted out my shoulder. And we'd had this kid come to my retreat a year ago, and he gave us a few of these ropes, and he was a ninja. He was shorter than me. He was built like, do you remember Jubei from the movie Ninja Scroll?
No.
Okay, like lean, really lean, like a triangle, wide shoulders. He was Iranian, this kid. And he was like skipping through the forest, like beautiful, bright, shining eyes. And he was swinging the heavy clubs that we've got. Like he was swinging the 20-kilo club with one arm. And he was just all sinew. And I was like, wow, this guy's incredible. But he was a real advocate of this rope flow, and he had picked it up off Kim Sheath. But anyway, so I hadn't been practicing with the rope, but then I saw this guy, Edward, on Instagram, and he was saying that the rope was what sorted out his long-term shoulder problem. And now he's lifting 90-kilo kettlebells and swinging them around and stuff. And I was like, okay, cool. I've got a rope that Ian gave me at retreat. I'll start swinging it. And I just moved, and I wasn't teaching for a few months, and so I was doing lots of rope flow. And it was awesome. I was like, oh, this is fantastic. It's like the Kali sort of Sinawali stick weaving patterns, but with a rope, and it's got enough load that you feel your body working, and it's behind your body, above your body, your front, to the sides and whatever. And it was really sorting my shoulders out. And so I was practicing for an hour or so for 2 weeks. And after 2 weeks of practicing for an hour or so, some niggling shoulder pain that I'd had for years was not there. I was like, this is awesome.
Wow.
And so I looked into the WEC method, and they're all doing exactly what you're talking about. Fully closing one side of the body, fully opening the other side of the body with a twist and axial extension, and they're applying that to everything. And so they're all doing landmines. So I don't know if you've seen people with the landmine university stuff where they're doing clean and jerks with like a barbell, with one end of the barbells on the ground. And so
I know.
lifting and doing all this stuff. And it's all got this one side of the body, other side of the body, which is something we work in all the crawling patterns that I do. And right from the start in the early days, the MoveNat were doing crawling, and they're like, you must keep your spine straight and core stability, and doing this robotic crawling. And I was like, nah, guys, like you got to be like bending the spine as much as possible. And it's not efficient in the same way, but it's ancestral. It feels good. It opens up your ribs. It's like you really helps you feel. And that's what's in walking. Like when you're walking, you should have a bit of that. Yeah. And now I see the WEC method guys, and they're walking and they're talking about like the cheetah and like, you know, and all this. And I'm like, awesome. So I've been interacting with those guys, and David Weck is like, he's really working the mad genius kind of thing. And when I did some of the stuff with them, I feel like some of the things they're doing are kind of quite gimmicky and a bit silly, but the basic thing of like one side of the body opening, one side of the body closing really seems to be hitting the fitness world at the moment. And I think it's fantastic. I think it's awesome. You know, people are doing it with kettlebells. People are doing it with, the landmine and the barbell and all this stuff. And it's just so good for you, man. Like this, like not like keeping the spine, not letting the spine move in the frontal plane thing that has been prevalent in fitness. It's good, but it's just part of the story, and it needs to be balanced out, or it can get a lot of benefit from, balancing out, getting this other stuff going on. And it makes people look more like lizards. And so I want people to look more like lizards and feel more like lizards. So that's all awesome. Yeah.
This is doing nothing for the conspiracy theory that the world is controlled by lizards.
We are the reptilians. That's what I'm trying to tell you, Graham. You're going to pull up your face mask to reveal the lizard. Destroying the planet, we're murdering each other, and it's because who are the reptilians? It's us. It's always been us. It's us all along. Damn it. Yeah, that means we're responsible for not doing it as well.
Yeah, that's suddenly a lot of responsibility. I'm not happy with that.
Yeah, I know.
Can we go back to the spaceship and just ask for our money back?
Yeah.
Do you want to talk? Do you know about Shingi and animals? Do you want to talk about that?
Shingi and animals?
Yeah,
sure. I mean, that was part of what led me to Ancestral Movement. Shingi-chan was probably where I originally, along with the yoga pranayama, was probably where I originally started to feel the spinal wave. And this, like, like even just like your Zuan, Pi-chan, like has like, and we're realizing, the Zuan-chan into the Pi-chan it's the galloping movement of all mammals. It's the classic mammal pattern, It's like the reptile have the side to side, and then that rolling action of the spine, that's the galloping of the mammals, of the tiger, and the tiger form exactly is like the archetype. Yeah, so Shingi was absolutely formative for my practice and for the development of Ancestral Movement. Absolutely.
It's a very animalistic art, isn't it? Because even the Santi Shur, the posture you take, is defined by animal words, isn't it? Like chicken leg, dragon body, bare shoulders,
absolutely,
eagle claw.
Totally. Yeah. And so I still, like, I haven't been practicing my Shingi like as Shingi since I lived in Taiwan now, like since after I came back from Taiwan. So like haven't been practicing it like formally for like 10 years, partly because I teach Chinese practices twice a week currently. And I tried for a little while, like when I came back from Taiwan, I tried for a little while teaching Bagua and Xingyi, and I just felt like it was a waste of time. Like those arts are advanced, and you have to practice every day. You have to practice a lot to even begin the transformative process. Whereas Qigong, different Qigong forms like the Hunyuan Qigong is what I chose to use as the scaffolding to layer in the body methods and the mind methods and the breath methods and so on. Anyone can do it, and anyone can get benefit straight away. And so I stopped teaching Xingyi and Bagua. And because I wasn't teaching them, it meant that I kind of wasn't practicing them. I was practicing my Bagua a lot more, and then I practice my Xingyi on and off. But so I haven't been practicing them much, but I still, in all that I do, in all the things that I teach, we practice the chicken legs principle. We practice the eagle claws principle. We practice the dragon body principle. And I like to tell people when we're practicing them, it's like, hey, you know, we use different examples and we go, hey, this stuff is from Chinese martial arts. This one's from a weird Chinese martial art called Xingyi Chuan, like form, intention, like fist and whatever. But the dragon body isn't a metaphor. It's an anatomical fact. You know, like I'm running a workshop in 2 weeks called the serpent spine, and I do this one where it's called the serpent spine, and we sometimes call it the dragon body. And it's like, because we each at our core have the central axis of a sea serpent, a swimming dragon, because that's what we came from. And then in biology, I think Neil Shubin talks about it, the science of cladistics. In the science of cladistics, we never stopped being bony fish. We're still bony fish. We never stopped being four-limbed reptiles or tetrapods. We're still tetrapods with modification. You know what I mean? So it's like, oh, okay, so the dragon body the serpent spine is an anatomical fact at the center of our beings. And I feel like a lot of the Chinese arts, like Xingyi, you don't have to be able to say this verbally, but if you practice them, you get this feeling. You know what I mean? You get that feeling. And so they're not, like some people talk about like, oh, we don't want to copy the actual movements of the animal. And some people are like, yeah, you want to embody the spirit of the animal and all that. And I'm like, yeah, all that's true. Absolutely. But through these movements, we are training the parts of our anatomy that we have in common with the monkey.
Yes. I love this because I get annoyed about people going, well, it's the it's you want to pretend you're a tiger and you got to be vicious. And I'm kind of thinking like, it's called tiger embrace because that is literally actions tigers make, and we are copying the actions that they make. You know, their niche in nature is what we're copying. And equally, I also get kind of annoyed when people kind of go, well, tigers like that's tiger. It's like, well, no, it's you being a tiger, right? So you are copying its physical movements. So if it's a spirally thing like this, then any variation on that is, as long as you've got the same flavor to it,
right?
You know, whether it's that or this, you know, or that. It's like it's all tiger as long as it's done with tiger shing, the shape of the shapes of terrible translation, but the character of tiger, you know, and like you say, they're anatomical, physical things because we have a lot in common with them.
Totally. Yeah, like like watching animal videos is like, I don't have nearly as much time to just watch random shit on YouTube as I used to before I had kids and stuff. But like still, now that since we entered this era of like high definition nature videography.
Yeah, they're better, isn't it?
Oh man. And you see these ones where you get to watch a slow motion, really detailed image of like, for example, a tiger leaping. And you see this incredible wave of force ripple through from its back legs, and you see its hips. And again, if you've trained your hips to squat and rise, like, well, and then you feel that your hips are the same as the tiger's hips, and this wave ripples through its spine, ripples through its ribcage, and it moves through all the soft, heavy, muscular flesh out to the fingertips, and it goes, and it's this wave of pure, utterly soft, but all powerful. There's only power, and the softness, you see how the softness allows the power to be completely uninterrupted, and it goes and flows through, and you go, the tiger shape. And it is literally the anatomical movement, the same biomechanics as what we do in the Xingyi. Literally, it's identical. It is the same body. You know, it rises, it falls, and it pulls closed again. So sort of stuff was like, again, part of what helped me understand what I was doing, and part of why I started calling it Ancestral Movement, and part of, you know, I love those examples again, because it's like, yeah, they have, you know, they're ritualized as well. They're ritualized, repeated practices of embedding the animal body into our body, and then discovering that the animal body has always been there in our body. You know what I mean? And it's like, it's super shamanic, but also, and this is one of the huge things, and this is why I teach the Chinese stuff. Like, I don't teach other forms. I was always very wary of teaching meditation, because I was like, I don't want the responsibility of being a meditation teacher, because I know what meditation can do to you. But in the Chinese systems, it's like, we've got all this leg training. We've got all this body training. It's like, yeah, you sink into your legs. Your legs get thick. They get strong. Your center gets like strong and tough. And then you're also, boom, going out, expanding your senses to the sky and you know, resting in emptiness. And you're getting all these powerful altered states, but they're grounded massively in your body and your muscles and your flesh. And the Xingyi, it's like, it's super shamanic if you're the type of person who is likely to get taken into those realms at some point. But the physical training of like really coming into your body and making it like gristly and sinewy and soft and relaxed, but also muscularly strong, all of that stuff is the protection from getting lost in the shamanic elements, from getting lost in the fantasy elements, from getting lost in the altered states and feeling your personality, you know, all of those things. And it's like, so that's why, like, my part of my passion for the Chinese traditions is like, these are so clever of people. And it's like, I don't think Chinese martial arts have very much to do with fighting at all. Like, they've got a little bit to do with fighting. Shuaijiao has a lot to do with fighting. The Sanda is fighting. But like Xingyi, it's like, sure, there's fighting in there, but these guys were geeking out hard on natural principles. They were getting high, man. They were getting high because this practice, you start to go, oh my God, my spine. Oh my God, I'm connected to all of nature. Oh my God, it's all breathing and it's making me strong and it feels good in my body, you know? And then I don't know if you've met Dan Harden or any people like that, but then there are these freaks who are OCD enough that they take it far enough that they become like insanely powerful fighters as well, but they're like less than 1%, you know what I mean? They're like 0.01% of all the people who practice these arts. They're deeply yogic arts, in my opinion. Yeah, sorry everyone. They're for ruthless, deadly fighting. Chinese martial art. Chinese Kung Fu is the most superior fighting style.
Well, I think Scott Phillips told me once that if somebody's good at fighting, they can use anything for fighting. So, like, if you're good at fighting and you happen to be in the Chinese martial arts, then you can use your Chinese martial arts for fighting. You know, it's a bit like that, isn't it?
Totally. Yeah. Like I mean,
remember all the badasses you've ever met in your life that just happened to be doing Chinese martial. I'm sure they'd have been like a badass if they'd been doing anything else as well.
Yeah, totally. It might be a badass despite the Chinese martial arts that they've been practicing. Yeah, like Steve Morris, you know, like Steve Morris.
Oh God, yeah.
Absolute hero. Like I was commenting on some of his posts years ago, and he like followed my profile to my website and was like, "What the fuck is this? It makes me vomit in my mouth. I hate this shit." But he's a hero of mine. I think he's an absolute, like, he's so all over the ancestral movement concept. Like, he's all over it and has been for decades. He's just like, he does animal head movements. He's like animal spine, animal rib cage, animal legs, animal hands. He's like absolutely all over it. And heaps of the stuff that he does is straight out of the Xingyi textbook. Is like, absolutely, but he's not putting himself in. Well, he's not putting himself in a cage of like, I have to follow this art. He's like, no, I'm a fighter. So he's the example of a fighter who can take things from all these traditions and use them for fighting. Because they are useful for fighting if you're a fighter, but the tradition isn't about fighting. The tradition has some stuff in it that's useful for fighting. The tradition is about a little bit of fighting and all this other stuff. You know, that's my current perspective.
Yeah, I mean,
might be. Yeah,
I practice Xingyi animal stuff quite a lot because I just enjoy it. It's bloody wonderful, you know. Like especially like things like the monkey form, which is one of the hardest moves you could ever possibly want to pull off on a resisting opponent. A bit like Bagua, you know, like yeah, those moves they're lovely to practice, but you know, trying to do those on someone who's fighting back would be almost impossible. But it's just fun to do, you know. And I was going to also ask you before we finish about jiu-jitsu. Because obviously you've got into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu these days, like myself. I think there's a lot of internal martial arts people who have eventually found their way into it. I don't think it's a coincidence. Sadly, one of them, Steve Cotter, died a couple of days ago, which is a bit of a tragedy. But he only got into it about 5 years ago, I think, because his son does it. So I can imagine them going together to the same class and having like a father-son thing. But he was tearing it up. Like, there are videos on his YouTube channel of him doing, he's a tiny guy. He's incredibly physically conditioned, but he was a small guy. He's in the absolute division fighting these giants, and he's winning. It's amazing. So what, I mean, how did you end up in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in the end?
When I was living in Taiwan in probably, I think I came back to Australia in 2009. And so when I was in Taiwan, I'd done judo as a kid, and then I'd done some Japanese jiu-jitsu living in Australia. And then I lived in Japan. I was doing Daitoryu, Japanese jiu-jitsu. And so, I loved all the joint locking and things. And I actually tried to join the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu group in Tokyo in the year 2000, but they didn't respond to my messages on their answering machine. Right. And they didn't respond to my emails. And so I just ended up doing other things. So I could have possibly become a black belt far earlier. I've been a shitty purple belt for the last 3 years, but I possibly could have become a black belt far earlier, or I possibly could have broken my body far earlier, depending on what group was, and given up. Yeah. But when I came back to Australia, so I was looking in Taiwan, I did a couple of MMA classes at a couple of different places, but I was mostly there to do Bagwan Xingyi with Lord Duxiu. So I was doing that very much, and I didn't end up having time to do the MMA. But then when I came back to Australia after a few years, I didn't want to stand in lines doing solo exercises anymore. Like, I was back with my old Kung Fu teacher in Canberra, who's absolutely incredible, but it was like, it's been 15 years and there's some good push hands going on, but there's still no sparring. And I was like, there's never going to be any sparring. It's coming later, but I was like, there's never going to be any sparring. Okay, cool. I understand now. And I was like, I just wanted physical contact, And so I started going to open mats. One of my old friends from my activist days had become a dedicated wrestler and a wrestling coach. So I started going to open mats with the wrestlers and just trying my body out against actual grapplers and getting absolutely schooled, but also being able to do things that they didn't expect and didn't understand, like being difficult to throw, different things and whatever. And it was really fun. And I was like, I want more of this. Eventually it was just like, cool, I'll just start doing jiu-jitsu. And I had a very hypermobile body growing up, really flexy, really loose, and lots of injuries to all my major joints since I hit puberty. And so when I started doing jiu-jitsu, it was also around the time that I took up like basic, real mainstream strength training, and the same time that I took up my medical science degree, because I was just like, I've been doing all this esoteric stuff living in Asia. And I was like, I just want to get really good with my anatomy and physiology. I want to understand neuroscience. I want to be able to lift a barbell, swing a kettlebell, and wrestle with actual wrestlers. I want to have my esoteric stuff, but I want to be able to communicate with normal people, And I had that realization where I was like, I'd done enough meditation that if I spotted someone on the internet or someone in a conversation talking about meditation, I could tell in a second that they hadn't done enough meditation to know what they were talking about. I was like, I can spot that they're talking shit. And so then here I am as a movement guy. And if I can't meet basic barbell standards, then anyone who can meet basic barbell standards can just look at me and be like, this guy doesn't know fucking basics. Why should I listen to anything he's going to say? And then same with wrestling. I was like, okay, like I need to have this basic competence in normal things in order to be able to interact with people and then learn from them and also share my ideas with them. Once I also can work out what's useful about what I know, what's useful to these people. Some people might have all this, be interested in all this other stuff, but what's useful, because I was a rehab practitioner doing exercise rehab and all this sort of stuff, but it's like, you get, it's like, so anyway, I went through this phase of several years of trying to get basically competent, and doing grappling showed me straight away. It's like, I thought I'd rehabbed all these old injuries. I'd rehabbed them enough, even for capoeira, but I hadn't rehabbed them enough for getting my arms twisted aggressively by really strong dudes. So I had to do lots of strength training and then lots of jiu-jitsu. And those first few years was a lot of injury, time off the mats and coming back. And then it was about like probably 10 years ago, and I moved back to Canberra and I joined the gym Elements in Canberra. If there's anyone from Canberra listening, Elements is an absolutely fantastic gym, one of the best gyms I've encountered in the world, where they're doing intelligent jiu-jitsu. And most of the coaches are little dudes who weigh about 70 kilos and they're good, and they're smart and they're nerds and they're friendly. They don't let like assholes train at their gym. And it was just great, man. It was just great to be like out of that thing, that internal martial arts poison of like, oh no, I have to be perfect. If my posture gets broken in public, I lose face. I'm humiliated, and therefore I won't do anything with anyone. Or if they do break my posture, I'll get red in the face and come up with all sorts of excuses. And
if I move my foot an inch, I've lost. That's the mentality, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. But so then just rocking up to jiu-jitsu and just being like, yeah, I'm just going to try and be a good training partner and just like learn from these dudes and get absolutely schooled. And also by just being intelligent and not being a dick, like learn heaps, and man, it's just been the best. It's just been absolutely the best. And so now I coach a little bit, I got kids and stuff. So I only get to train once a week or twice a week if I'm lucky, but it's like in it for the long haul, and also like really having to be smart about who I roll with now, because
that's the next thing, isn't it?
Well, this is really my push now. And I'm loving this ecological approach that's taking the jiu-jitsu world by storm at the moment, because it's like, that's what I was trying to invent in my
that's like you in training, right?
Yeah, totally. Because it's like, I teach wrestling to non-wrestlers on all of our camps. In all of my classes, we do wrestling with 50-50 men and women, a wide range of fitness and strength levels. Everyone's injured. No one's ever, more than half of them will never, ever go to a wrestling gym. They will not go to a grappling gym, but they want to wrestle. People want to wrestle. And so creating games and looking up all these wrestling games and stuff. Yeah, so that's my real thing, is like wrestling for ordinary people and game-based wrestling that's fun right from the start. And there's none of this like 12-step techniques to an armbar, which you'll never do on anyone, because they're all bigger than you. They're all stronger than you. They're all faster than you. They're all better at jiu-jitsu than you. So I didn't do it. I didn't get an armbar on anyone for 12 years, man, except for like,
12 years? That's young to me.
If I was wrestling with a 50-kilo girl or whatever, like I could get an armbar, but it was like I never got an armbar on any of the actual, in any serious role, but on anyone, just because I was older and like slower and whatever. But I was getting armbarred all the time, but we spent so many classes learning all the steps to do an armbar, and it's like
there's too many, aren't there?
There's so much,
especially armbar from the guard. There's about 6 steps in it, right? And I thought anything with more than 3 steps, if I'm teaching it, I'd never do more than 3 steps to anything, because any one of those steps, it could all change and branch off into like a multitude of different paths. So if you're doing more than 3, you're just into complete fantasy. You can do an armbar in 1 step as well. Once you're good at it, you don't need 3 steps. You can just go boom and do it.
I have to say, like, as a big advocate of the ecological approach, I'm also, and this is one of the other things that made me like just love jiu-jitsu right from the start, was when you're in a room on the mats and everyone that's in there is showing up regularly. And so it's you and all the dudes who are always showing up for like the Tuesday lunchtime class, and everyone's there and we've all wrestled each other. We know each other's strengths and weaknesses. We're all like, oh, I want to get you. I want to get you. Or, oh, you keep getting me with that move. I want you to not get me with that move. We've all got our shit that's like ticking away that we're trying to improve. And then the coach is showing something, and the jiu-jitsu environment was one of the first environments I'd ever been in where when the instructor is giving some information, everyone's like quiet. Everyone's like not being told, come over here so you can see. Everyone's hopping up and moving around the room to get the angle that they can see what they want to see. And they're like really trying to pick it up. And I was like, man, like just as a learning environment, I've never seen this before. No one's bored. No one's like, whatever. Everyone's paying attention because they really want to learn this stuff, And so it's like, I love the ecological approach. I'm a total convert. I was a convert before anyone else was calling it the ecological approach. But I think the technical instruction is really, really good for people who have the framework already. And then they're like, oh, that's something that keeps happening. I didn't know I wasn't doing that. That, one of those 6 details, they'll be like, aha, I needed that. Thanks. And then they do it.
Yeah. I mean, that's
I don't want to throw it out the window. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm really in favor of playful learning. I think playfulness is inherent in the human experience. Like if you like the best sumo wrestlers in Japan are all Mongolian because they started in a playful, almost family environment where they just mess around. That's how their training starts in Mongolia. Whereas in Japan, it's very strict and harsh. And it's no coincidence that all the top guys are Mongolian because they've used playfulness as a tool, right? However, there are some aspects of jiu-jitsu where you have to put your leg here. Otherwise, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
If no one ever tells you to put your leg there, it might take you 30 years to work that out on your own.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's like,
It just made me think because so, when I coach jiu-jitsu or when I coach just about anything now, it's like I try to always do the thing, preferably some sort of game. And then we'll talk about it and we'll give some details. Don't sit there talking and giving details to a group of people who haven't done the thing yet because they're looking around. They don't know what you're talking about. Most people aren't actually listening most of the time. You know what I mean? It used to really frustrate me, but now I'm like, no, normal people aren't actually they're not listening most of the time.
Thing going on in their head.
Yeah. And why should they listen? Why should they listen? It's like, they're not listening because it's not relevant. So do the thing. And then there's context, and then it's relevant, and then do a little bit of talking, a little bit of detail, and then add it back into the next layer of the game. And that's how we should do it. And so it just made me think talking to you, it's like, because, I'm like Tai Chi trained, like Tai Chi, like how do we apply some of this ecological approach stuff to internal martial arts? So it's not just, because some of it's ritualized, formalized, yogic, or whatever, but maybe we should be beginning Tai Chi with freestyle push hands. Or with limited push hands games,
Tai Chi has a big advantage over a lot of martial arts that it has push hands, which is a playful learning environment. So in theory, it's already got that, right?
It's just maybe we should be starting with push hands.
Yeah,
rather than starting with form, we should start with a bit of push hands and then introduce like grasping the bird's tail sequence or whatever with a bit of structure testing, and then more push hands.
Yeah, that would be like if you want to make Tai Chi an actual martial art, that would be the way to do it. But most people don't want it to be a martial art. They want the movements for my shoulder hurts, so I need to practice this,
But even just for ingraining the body skills, there's a game associated which teaches you more about balance and structure than you can learn in 1,000 hours of solo practice.
Yeah, because it's live.
Yeah,
it's a lot, and it's in terms of getting in touch with nature. I mean, nature is our bodies, right? So if you're actually using your body to do something against someone else's body, this is the same as sitting in a field on your own and absorbing nature. You're still experiencing nature, aren't you? So it's like we've got all the tools are there. I know I've seen people doing this in Tai Chi. There was a guy recently. He's in Hove in the UK, and he's got a school called 5 Snakes or something like that.
Oh, I haven't watched the videos yet. Yeah, he posted that.
Yeah, but it's basically doing what I call snake grappling. Shingi snake has yin yang, 2 aspects. The yang aspect is like the viper, quick strikes. The yin aspect is grappling. It's the anaconda, right?
Right. So it's pummeling.
Yeah. And what they're doing to me looks like what I would call snake grappling, because they're just doing snake-like movements, trying to get into the vulnerable areas of the body, like the under the armpits, behind the head, back of the knee.
Right.
And they drop a few strikes in too, but I guess that makes you wake up a bit if you go to sleep.
Yeah.
So but there are people who are doing this with Tai Chi at the moment, which is
totally
nice to see,
Yeah, when I was living in China, I went up to Beijing for a couple of weeks at the end to do some Bagua training. Do you remember Tomasz from the old forum? Yeah. Polish guy who was living in Beijing studying Bagua drum with Jules Valjean. So I went up and trained with those guys, and we'd do push hands at Tomaja's place, but he introduced me to his Tongbei Chuan teacher. And his Tongbei Chuan teacher was a real advocate of doing freestyle push hands with grabbing of the head and punching to the body and foot sweeps and stuff. And this Tongbei guy was like, he was short, he was stocky, he was real heavy, and would just do these real heavy, meaty, like Systema type slipping punches to the body in the push hands. And it was absolutely fantastic. And they just did heaps of that training. And so Tomaj like had this long Bagua background, and he had really good body skills from his Bagua. And then he had this push hands game, which just let him play with all his Bagua skills. And he had real Bagua skills. And it was like, and I was just like, oh, awesome. Because we did freestyle push hands back in Australia, in Canberra with my crew there. But then the addition of the slipping punches really made it, because you had to have that fast sort of twitch response.
Yeah.
But it was still safe. So it was like, yeah, cool. Like I love seeing people do that. It's definitely in there. And I think it was probably in there a lot more in the Chinese martial arts, but it's just been like, as the demographics have shifted and it's more like nerds and old people, and then people who actually want to punch each other are doing other things.
Yeah, exactly. And it becomes more ritualized and more formal, doesn't it? Like there's pattern A of push hands, and then there's pattern B, and you can only do, like today we're going to do pattern A. Like you can't go outside, that you're in a box and you can't get outside it anymore. My Tai Chi teachers was never like there's one pattern and then you go free.
Right.
Like he was never like, I'm going to teach you 16 different patterns and this is 7-star stepping or what. No, it was just, you just step around where you need to and you just go, which is a much better way of doing it, I think. Wow. Okay. I think we've been going for about, I don't know, an hour and a half. I think we should probably wind up.
We should wrap it up. Yep.
Yeah. If people want to find out about your workshops and more about you, do you have a website, social media, or anything?
Yeah, ancestralmovement.com is my website. I recently have finally upgraded to Squarespace and just took down the old WordPress site that I built myself 14 years ago, which was full of 14 years worth of bugs. But so all my old blog posts are down and it's just a really minimal website, but I'm going to start putting stuff up there again soon. Ancestral Movement on Instagram. My Facebook group for the local practice group where I live in Northern Rivers, New South Wales, is Ancestral Movement Mullumbimby. And then there's the Ancestral Movement Facebook group, which, was really, really active for many years there, but in recent times has become fairly quiet because I haven't got much space in my life to be arguing with people on the internet. I think actually that's why it's quiet. We're not arguing enough. I haven't set myself up in opposition to anyone so that we can all get angry about something together. But anyway, yeah, you can find me on the internet through, just look up Ancestral Movement anywhere and you'll find me, or just my name, Simon Thakur. Yep.
Great. Well, there you go.
Nice fun.
Thank you. I really enjoyed that talk. That was really fun. Thank you very much.
Yeah, mate. It reminds me that I should look up Damon and your Heretics podcast again. I'd forgotten about that because I listened to the first episode and then the first several episodes and was really loving it. Is that the same one we guys talked about, like the history of Xingyi and stuff, or was that on the Tai Chi?
No, that's the Heretics podcast.
Yeah, the Heretics.
But we also do one called Woven Energy.
Yeah,
and that is, I'm not on that one. It's him and Joe, but that is purely shamanism.
Yeah, so, I listened to a couple of them too.
Yeah, they're good. They're really good.
I've been really off the podcast thing for like many years now. Like I listen to like 1 or 2 podcasts a year. Because I don't really like listening to stuff when I'm doing other stuff, and I don't do enough long driving, so I just forget about podcasts. But I really appreciated what those guys were doing, and I should listen a bit more. I liked the history ones on the Heretics channel too.
Yeah, he's very good on history, but he's also incredibly good. The one he just did on bone from Xingyi, he did about 10% of his notes for the episode. It took an hour. Right. It's a level of insane detail that you just don't find anywhere else.
I love the whole like scholar practitioner thing.
Yeah, he's got the brain the size of a planet.
Yeah, but anyway, I'll look up Damon and those things and try and feed myself them fascinating.
If you look, because it's all the stuff you're into, his woven energy stuff. It's exactly what you talked about, but from a slightly different perspective, if you know what I mean, like from like a Mongolian and Japanese perspective, I guess.
Yeah, wicked.
Yeah, but you'll just make the connection as to what he's talking about. You'll go, oh yeah, anyway.
Yeah.
But his whole point is that these 7 stages are in every culture that's ever existed.
Right.
They all have the same stage. Sometimes they call them different things, or they have different number, but it's because they combine 2 together, or they've just split one into 2. But it's like it's something we get from our ancestry, not something we've got from a book. We get it from nature.
Absolutely. That's exactly why I called my thing Ancestral Movement, because I was like, oh, it's in us and it's suppressed. It's in every culture and every individual and every subculture. It's suppressed or expressed in different degrees, but it's the same stuff that's underneath, Yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting that it does seem to come out in times of conflict and times of stress, like like whenever a country is in trouble, suddenly all these religions appear out of nowhere, and it's because it's in there. But
Yeah.
Anyway,
nice one, man. Yeah, me too. All right, well, see you around. Good chat.
Thank you very much. Cheers, bye.
Later.
Hey, thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll see you later on in the year for more episodes.